In Armenia's capital, the president of the European Commission on hand to pledge an additional 18 million euros in economic support. This in the wake of Moscow imposing wide-ranging trade restrictions on that former Soviet state. Moscow doing so ahead of last month's elections that were won by the incumbent Civil Contract Party of Nikol Pashinyan. Russia had accused the West of interference in the vote. Armenia, which very much wants to turn more towards the West, more towards the EU. And joining us here in the studio are René Bertini and Cal Berjekian from our Enter social media storytelling site. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's just begin because we're about to talk about kind of what you caught as the vibe, one specific angle of it. But before we dive into it, Renee, the mood that you found, how pro-EU is it when you walk around Yerevan these days?
Well, Yerevan is quite interesting because Armenia really is at the crossroads of three continents. So it's very different. In the end, though, what ended up happening is Nikol Pashinyan's pro-EU party ended up taking the lead in this election, although people don't necessarily, agree with everything. A lot of the people we spoke to during the election, as we were here also during this time, kind of saw him as the lesser evil, we can say. But they are happy that they are staying in a pro-EU direction for now.
Yeah, there's politics, and of course, there's also social issues. You've combined the feat of giving us an insight into Armenia and discussing it at a time when it's Pride Month. And the angle that you found for this story, Cal, is a story about the drag scene.
Yeah.
The drag scene.
Well, there's a drag scene now, basically. So Renee and I went to Armenia in June, around a week before a underground drag performance in Armenia. And the drag scene is still very secretive, but it's growing exponentially. And so we followed two drag queens, one Armenian and one Russian, as they prepared for this performance. And we spoke to Leo, who's the Armenian drag queen that we followed. And he really coupled his performance and his drag with his activism. He's an activist with Pink Armenia, an LGBT organization in Armenia. And he said it best, his kind of introduction to drag.
The way I became a drag queen, even though I think I was born one, you don't become it. I was approached by a friend when I was 18. And he was like, hey, so Pink is organizing this event at a club and we want to do a drag show. And I was like, oh my God, yes. I don't know how to do this and I don't know how to do that. I don't have any clothing either. And I was like, girl, I don't care. I'm the fiercest. So I went on stage with the Scotch taped heels and all that, and I performed. The song was Britney Spears' Toxic, I remember, my first ever song. I ate. The crowd was fucking crazy, and when I was done, something switched in me that I felt like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, all these bad, all this addiction, all this being bullied, beaten up, killed, all of this was for this.
So, Renee, you prefaced this conversation by saying Armenia is not a monolith. When it comes to social issues, there's divides. Mm-hmm. He seems very bold on camera, Leo, but how tough has it been for him?
It is really difficult to do this because to do drag in Armenia, because here in Paris specifically, we're very used to drag. It's basically mainstream. We can see it on primetime television. We can go to drag brunch in the Marais, you see it regularly. In Armenia, though, it's still very much underground. And, Leo talks about it very nonchalantly, but it is very difficult. It's hard for people to live with this secret identity a lot of times. They don't necessarily want their families to know about it because of homophobic backlash, domestic violence. It's hard to find venues to do drag. Not a lot of people want to work with drag queens. And the few that do often get shut down, sometimes because of hate crimes, which is what happened in the case of Queer Club DIY in 2012, which was firebombed, or sometimes in the cases of police raids. And we saw firsthand what even the mention of police can cause during the drag show that we filmed with Cal when we were on the ground. During the show, one of the drag queens fainted, and so an ambulance had to be called. And this is what happened right after.
I'm afraid, you guys, I have to tell you that we called an ambulance and the police will also come. So for your own safety, I would recommend for you to leave the club peacefully, without panic, okay? Normally, without panic. Thank you so much for coming. We love you a lot and see you again soon.
So basically, as you've just seen, as soon as the police was mentioned, the whole drag event was shut down. And the police did not end up coming that night, but the fear of what would have happened was really real. And we caught up with Leo a few days after this, and one of the things that he told us that he was afraid would happen was the police harassing people watching the show, but also drag queens, maybe police doing ID checks, people being potentially outed to their families. And on top of that, Leo told us that later in the night, when people were leaving or trying to leave the venue, there were some men outside of the venue shouting homophobic insults at them. And one of the queens on her way home was even followed by a man with a knife. And this is not the first time this has happened. This is pretty regular. But what is amazing is that despite this and despite how hard it is to be part of this community, this scene has been thriving in the past couple of years, and more people are joining. Yeah.
How so?
Well, it started as kind of small NGO-funded events that are really underground, and now there's kind of, they're attracting crowds of hundreds. And while it's still underground, it's still like word of mouth. You have to kind of know where to go, and it's not really public. One of the reasons why it's kind of grown so much over the past couple of years is surprisingly because of Russians fleeing Russia after the war in Ukraine. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Russians left Russia after the start of the war. Many of them were fleeing the partial military mobilization, others sanctions, some like Molly, who was one of the Russian drag queens that we invited, or the Russian drag queen that we interviewed. She was a queer refugee from Russia. Her drag bar was raided, basically. And so tens of thousands of these Russians moved to Armenia, and they affected the scene in like two specific ways. One, they had kind of an appetite for drag. Drag was incredibly popular in Russia before the war in Ukraine. So that's kind of, there's a new audience for this basically now. And when we were there, one of the surprising things that we kind of saw was the performers, when they were talking to the audience, they were speaking in English, Russian, and Armenian, but in fact they were speaking Russian more than Armenian because the audience was so international. And the second way that they kind of affected the scene is they changed how Armenia looks, and like on a population level. So I was in Armenia 10 years ago, and when I was there, it was an incredibly homogenous country. I never saw anyone, basically everyone kind of looked the same. I never saw anyone with colored hair or like any visible tattoos. And we spoke to the drag queen, specifically Leo, who talked about how this kind of changed once the Russians arrived.
Like you would see a man who's Russian wearing earrings, piercings, having tattoos, having colored hair, like green colored hair, wearing like item of clothing which maybe looks like from a female section. And then also next to him you would see his wife and kids, and he's pushing a stroller. So that way Armenian people maybe saw it and it clicked in their brain that, oh, it's not necessary that this means gay. This means like, you know, expression of other ways, but doesn't have anything to do with their sexuality, at least in the capital, in Yerevan. So yeah, so they got used to things like that. But then here's the thing, it's okay if you're Russian, but if you're Armenian and you're doing it, you're bringing shame to your people, so you're not allowed to do it.
Interesting. So different perception according to... more broadly, how do Armenians feel about this influx of Russians, Renee?
Yeah, well, for the queer community, there has been like positive impacts like Cal spoke about, but also negatives. As Leo just mentioned, you know, some of the leeway that is given to Russians is not given to Armenians, but also a big impact has come on the Armenian economy. A lot of the Russians who came into Armenia, some of them working, for example, in the tech bubble, were a lot more affluent than the average Armenian. And this meant that when tens of thousands of people came into Yerevan and brought the rent incredibly up. A lot of Russians were still able to afford rent, but a lot of Armenians couldn't. And this especially affected minorities like the queer community, which had to many times either lose their home or move back into their family home. And this exposed them to an increased risk of domestic violence, as we can see with looking at data from Pink Armenia, the NGO that Cal was speaking about earlier. They gathered data on domestic violence against LGBTQ community, and as we can see from 2022, there's been a sharp increase.
The full documentary available already on the Enter website?
So we're currently editing it, but
Okay.
it should come out, well, it will come out at the end of the month on July 23rd. So you can subscribe to Enter and you'll get a notification when it comes out.
All right, many thanks for that, Cal Berjikian. Renee Bertini, thanks again. Again, the Enter website, which can be found or accessed via also the YouTube channel
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
France 24.
ENTR space EN for our content in English.